Okay then, episode 2. So this episode takes us up to the point of Luke being taken to the police station. He must start off again there, and then he's stripped, and his clothes are taken away, his phone's taken away, he's swabbed, he's photographed, and he's examined, and it's all without an adult present.
Yes, yeah.
And then you start to talk about trial by media. That was it, and that comes out, isn't it? How his family and how Luke, his mum, Luke's name was released to the press, which what? Okay, we'll come to that. Then it brings up to when he was arrested 9 months after Jodie's murder. And then we find out Luke's movements on the night of Jodie's murder as well. So that's what that episode's about.
Yeah, that's right.
Detail. Why was his name released? I mean, I remember you saying that it's not ethical for the newspapers to. They know they're not supposed to, but they kind of they want to. But he was 14, so why was that allowed? Why did they do that? I'm not saying why did they do it, but do you know what I mean? What's your thought?
Yeah. I mean, I still grapple with this, and I did ask. So one of the interviewees that I've got on the podcast is a media lawyer called Ken, and he's taught law and ethics to university students for years. And I said to him, is this allowed? Because this feels very wrong. And he said, until somebody is arrested, you can actually say what you want. Ethically and morally, there should have been some sort of reprimand internally for the editor, who had chosen to actually print that information. But this was a salacious story. This was a story that was going to sell newspapers. Yeah. And that won over protecting the identity of a 14-year-old. And I think what had happened was as well, there was, this is, I can't say this has been proven, it hasn't, but there was speculation that one of the police officers was feeding information to the journalists, and there was a relation in there. So that was potentially a reason that they were going with that. Something that does predate that slightly is that before it was released to the media, when Luke was interviewed that first night with, and his mother was as well, the tapes, I mean, this is back in the day when they had cassette tapes, and maybe they still do, I haven't been arrested, so I'm not sure. But when you put the tape in, they would have a label on it, and Luke's was labelled suspect and Corin's was labelled witness. So very early on, it was very clear what the narrative was. And it didn't take long before people to realise that Luke was definitely a person of interest at that time. And, if you look at this as a journalist, and I have, obviously I am a sort of a journalist, TV journalist and podcast journalist, I understand. I mean, I'm not like this, but I do see other people who like a sensational storyline. And he fit the look. I mean, he looked different. He looked, as we've talked, he looked a bit like a skater boy. So to have this kind of dark, moody teenager with long hair and a bandana, and this tragedy of this 14-year-old girl who'd been murdered in the most brutal way in a small town in Scotland, that was intriguing. People were picking up the paper, and this was front page stuff. This wasn't buried, deep in on page 36 or whatever. This was front page. So that narrative, and fingers pointing towards him went almost straight away. So do I think it's wrong? Absolutely. But is it illegal? No.
That's awful.
And then I think what really kicked it off was on the 4th of July, which was 4 days later, the police arrived at Luke's home with a search warrant, and the press were there.
Oh.
So there are images, and those images are available online. You can see those on news reports, and Channel 5 did a 2-part documentary on this called Murder in a Small Town. And you can see it is, a very average house, absolutely surrounded by photographers, and the police are bringing out a lot of evidence, and they've got crates, they've literally got crates of stuff that they're bringing out. So it was like almost like pantomime. People are coming out, and they're taking photographs, and they're taking film footage, and that's all still available to look at this day. And like I say, in such a short period of time after she'd been
4
found.
days, wasn't it? The 4th
Yeah.
of July, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's even without investigating. I mean, that was night one they'd had on the tape suspect with no investigation, just that said it there, didn't it?
Yeah.
That was the set their stall out right there.
Yeah.
And by doing the search warrant, again, that's sending a clear sign, isn't it? There's the papers can see it all, and
absolutely,
he had no chance.
Yes.
Yeah. Now I know. So you mentioned something about if Luke had killed Jodie, why would he have led them to her body? You know, by being in the search party, would he not have wanted to be far away from it? But I think a lot of people do want to be right involved in it too, don't they? And show that they're helping. And do you know? There's that too.
And there have been killers in the past who have, they revisit the crime scene, and they do show an interest in the murder. And I don't really know, the real psychology behind that, but I do remember reading somewhere that they almost relive the experience by going there, and part of their crime is seeing the reaction of other people. It's seeing that tragedy, it's seeing that emotion. But I'm just not convinced that fits Luke at all. And again, I mean, with the whole finding the body, there was one thing that really stood out to me, which was they said that they actually walked past that V shape in the wall, and it was actually the dog, Mia, that doubled back and put her her paws on the V in the wall and started sniffing over the wall. And that had kind of then alerted them. So that I know when there's quite a few people that do protests for Luke, and one of the big banners that they use is Luke didn't find Jodie, Mia did. And then they have a picture of the dog. So that's just another thing to sort of keep in mind there as well.
Yeah. Or, I mean, he could be, she was a tracker dog. He maybe was being clever, but then he wouldn't have known that her family would say, oh, let's go back again. It's just leaving too much to chance there if that's what his goal was.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm not sure about that either. You got a lot of transcripts. You went through to read through a lot of transcripts. Yes. Did you happen to get the transcripts from Luke's mum and, Luke himself? Did you get to read them?
No. So I actually got those through a criminologist who supports him. Her name is Dr. Sandra Lean. She actually was not a criminologist before Luke's case. She was a woman that lives locally to Luke. And she had 2 daughters who lived in the area, and was obviously very concerned that a girl of her daughter's age had been found like this. And then she sort of learned more about the investigation, and she thought something was wrong, and she became quite pally with Corinne, his mum. Unfortunately, Corinne is quite ill. So I spoke to Sandra, and she had a lot of the transcripts, and that's where I got them from.
And what about the transcripts from Alice? And I mean, I know you talk later on about the transcripts. Their statements change a little bit, don't they? I was just curious to see what they said at the beginning, because they all seem to, back each other up at the time, didn't they? Right at the beginning, and then it changes.
Yeah.
And somebody you had on your show said, the first statement is usually the one they would go with, to give them more credit.
Yes.
So that was
because things change, don't they? And other things kind of infiltrate your brain. I actually think, though, as well, at the same time, there is something to be said about shock and grief and what that does to you in the beginning. So I have no idea what statement I would have chosen to believe first and foremost, but there are significant changes. And if you listen to the episodes, we do kind of talk through them and the discrepancies there. And there are quite a few, but I think some discrepancies would be completely natural, especially in that state of, shock and grief. Our body does lots of things, our mind plays tricks on us and stuff. But yes, very quickly, narratives and attitudes changed 100%. And you know what? I don't blame the family, because this is such a massive, life altering, it's the worst thing that could possibly happen, isn't it? There is literally nothing else that could top this. So when I was reading through the statements and, who had said what, I took it all with a pinch of salt. And actually, what I was hoping for was more forensic evidence to come into play, something that would have actually given scientific fact rather than relying on 4 people who had all just lost somebody they loved.
Yep. And also, when they first gave their statement, I guess they didn't really know what the police were thinking about Luke or that he might be involved. But then at the trial and later on, they did know. So maybe they were just, maybe not deliberately, but maybe they just shifted that to try and make it fit as well, that they saw him as
definitely
the murderer.
Yeah, definitely a possibility. I think that the thing with this case is, when I started doing the podcast, I really wanted to come up with a really strong conclusion at the end, and what I soon found was, this is so complex. It's so intricate. And these are all human beings who have the ability to lie. Every single person on this earth has the ability to tell a lie and to keep a lie going. It's just about finding out who is doing that.
I know. The more, we'll get there. And I was just curious that why did the detectives have Luke in their sights from straight away? Now, you said he didn't have a previous record, he wasn't in trouble with the police, but because it was a small town, did they know of him? Had they already some sort of opinion about him that they just thought, he's our guy? Why was it straight away?
I think quite quickly, I mean, from what I can gather, and I'll never be in their heads, like I said, guttingly, because I would love to know. But what I think straight away, it was, number one, he looked a bit different. Number two, he was Jodie's boyfriend. And a lot of the time, this looked like a crime of passion. This was a personal crime. It was so brutal. What they did to that poor girl is so personal, or it feels so personal and feels so sadistic, that I think they were like, right, okay, well, there's a guy who looks a bit weird. He was the local weirdo, and Luke he actually described himself as the local weirdo. He was the boyfriend. People believe they had been meeting that night. They were due to meet up. There was not a discrepancy, but there is a time frame where Luke says, he was one place, and then a eyewitness says he was somewhere else, and then it just gets really muddy. And I think there were also, at the time, at the very, very early stages, there was no other indicators that it could have been anyone else, because the family had all been together and there was no local murderer going around, killing young girls or killing anyone. So I think he was possibly, I don't want to say an easy choice. I think it was probably right to investigate the boyfriend, but I don't think they kept their minds as open as they should have done.
So Luke was taken in and interviewed straight away. But then Jodie's family, they weren't interviewed until, was it 5 o'clock in the morning or something? They weren't
That's
until a
right.
long time later.
Yeah.
And they had time to talk and discuss. I mean, obviously they'd be devastated.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say was, you mentioned how badly she was attacked so severely and so savagely. What would the Luke's motive have been? You're saying that this is a very violent, aggressive, it looks like a very violent, aggressive person. He hadn't, as far as I know, ever portrayed this before. What would have been his motive for doing it? Were they not getting on? Was there anybody that said they weren't getting on?
No, there was speculation that there had been some I don't want to even say adultery for 14-year-olds, but some flirting. But with, she flirts with him, he flirts with her. That's kind of as deep as it ever came out to be. There was no history of them having, really turbulent arguments. There had been no reported violence within the relationship as well. And at 14 especially, you would hope not, but there hadn't been. That I've never ever got to the bottom of what that motive could be. But the police said that Luke was this devil-worshipping Satanist who loved Marilyn Manson. And Marilyn Manson, so if I'm sure everybody will know, but is an American sort of goth punk rocker. He's quite a controversial character. He's been accused of some quite serious crimes actually in recent years, and he is a dark character. He is very strange. Probably wouldn't want to bump into him on a night out.
But he sounded all right when he was speaking. That interview he did, he sounded quite normal for a little bit, didn't he? I thought, this is not what I expected.
I think he's quite intelligent from what I remember researching about him. He was a really intelligent person. He was an artist, and he actually, I think he's still got some of his art up for sale. But one of the paintings that he did was of a case that, God, I think it went back to, might have been the 40s. It was named as the Black Dahlia, and it was a model and actress who had been killed in a similar way to Jodie. Similar, not identical, similar. And the police ran with the narrative that he was also fascinated by the Black Dahlia murder because Marilyn Manson had done this picture of the Black Dahlia, which is quite jarring to look at. And they felt that that was a big part of him, and they were like, oh, he smokes a lot of cannabis and he's just snapped and he's done this because of the things he was into. But one of the biggest misconceptions was the fact that he was into Marilyn Manson. So he did have a Marilyn Manson CD, which they got when they searched his home. That CD was actually from a magazine that had been brought after Jodie had died. It was something that his mum had brought him a music. It came free with a music magazine. And it just so happened to be Marilyn Manson. And that's where this whole devil worshipping Marilyn Manson narrative, it fed into the media quite quickly because, of course, that's a great headline for them, as callous as that sounds, and it does. And this is why I don't work in the tabloids. But that's the sort of thing that sells newspapers, and it creates characters. And automatically this story becomes like a Hollywood film plot, a really dark Hollywood film plot. So to link it to an A-list singer out in Hollywood, that just gives it a whole other dimension that makes it more intriguing to people that are going to pick up that paper. So that was ultimately what they felt his motive was.
And what was Luke's room like? I mean, I remember when I was a young girl, anybody that I idolised, there was posters on the wall, there's posters on the roof. What was his room like? Was it covered in
a real typical teenage boy's room from what I've heard. And I've seen the things that they got from his room. And there are some things that did make me raise my eyebrows. So there was 20 bottles of Luke's own urine.
Oh, that's weird.
That is weird, totally weird. One thing that I will say is that one psychologist I did interview during the research said that collecting urine can sometimes happen after a traumatic event, and it's a reaction to trauma. It's about something you can control. When everything's being taken away from you, something you can control. I'm not diagnosing him. I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But it's weird, but does it make you a killer? No.
Did he only start doing that, do we know, after Jodie's death, or was he doing that before?
Do you know what? I've been told, I've read things that conflict, so I have no idea with that. But it is weird. And that within that, they also got this Marilyn Manson CD, and there was a calendar that featured Marilyn Manson. And then I think for me, the thing that made me, this is the thing that I've always thought, okay, that really concerns me, is that there was a knife pouch, and it was the number inscribed on it was 666, which is obviously the number of the devil, a demonic number. That for me, yes, that's odd and weird. Would I let my 14-year-old have a knife? I don't know. But then in the podcast, I do say my husband, and we don't live in the country. Well, I suppose we do we live near greenery. He's a fisherman. And I asked him when he got his first knife, and he said it was about 15 or 16. So he remembers being given a knife to go, to do fishing and to put up the tents and for camping and stuff, in replacement of a Swiss Army knife, So when you kind of look at it like that, I get it a bit, but it does still bother me. But again, owning a knife, my kitchen is to the right of me, and I've got about 20 knives in there. So I don't know.
Did he have that knife before Jodie died? I can't remember that.
That was the skunting knife, wasn't it? So I believe that had been brought for his birthday. So there was an empty pouch. I need to remind myself.
I thought he'd been given that knife by his mum after Jodie's death.
For his birthday.
And I thought, God, because I remember thinking, okay, well, that's not so strange. Jodie's died, and he's written this in the pouch, the date, her birthday and her death date. Thought, okay, fair enough, he's doing that. But then I thought, God, is it not a wee bit strange that the mum's buying a knife for him when his girlfriend's been stabbed, That's what I remember thinking. So I thought,
Yes.
I'm sure it was after.
Yes, I think that, there was definitely a knife bought for his birthday, which was after. So, yes.
I think that was a bit strange. I know what you're saying about the hunting, but I just think, well, you're being clearly investigated for this murder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not the best choice.
No.
I remember thinking that.
I never want to judge because I don't live in the countryside and the small town and stuff. But no, I absolutely think, given the circumstances, that probably wouldn't have been top my gift list.
No, but when you first started mentioning the knife, I thought that he'd had it previously and he'd written before Jodie's death, the end date, the death, and I thought, oh, well, that's totally suspicious. But then I realised I thought, fair enough.
No.
So I almost thought, well, got him nailed.
Well, I mean, that would have been pretty compelling evidence for sure. No. Absolutely. I mean, there were 2 searches done on his house as well. So, the first time they found stuff, and then the second time they found more, and there was
the whole thing knife, wasn't it?
That's right. And those were the things that did, I think, out of all the kind of evidence from the prosecution, that was what stuck with me the most.
The Stanley knife.
Yeah. And I told, like, when I spoke to some of Luke's legal team and Sandra, I did say that's the thing that gets me, and she's like, yeah, I understand that totally.
Really? So that was what made you think, oh, that's strange?
Yeah, out of everything.
Really?
Yeah.
See, for me, because I remember growing up, making question my childhood now. But I always remember there was always a Stanley knife kicking about our house in random places. It was always just, I'll get the Stanley knife. I always remember that. So see, I didn't even think twice about that. I was like, oh, they're having a laugh now.
Yeah. Do you know, it was very, to go back to, 20 years. I mean, God, we lived very differently, didn't we?
Yeah.
We really did. Things that I did and my friends did, there's no way on earth, on earth I let my kids do some of those. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
No, that's interesting. I didn't know that you would have found that strange.
Yeah,
see, this is why it's nice to talk, because it's different perspectives, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, because of everything else, I know that the rest of the episode, I mean, this is very much, I think what episode 2 does is introduce you to the trial by media element, but then also the kind of evidence from the prosecution, what they found and what they were running with. And then we kind of get into what his defense said a bit later on.
Yeah, I've got questions about the defense. I'm curious what they actually asked, but we'll get to that. But I wanted to ask you, the time of death, because her body was left out, uncovered all night, and a forensic person came, but they had a bad back and they couldn't go over the wall, so they had to wait. Was it 8 o'clock in the morning before somebody eventually got there?
Yes.
And then just said, without doing any tests, 5:15. Was that right?
Yes. So her estimated time of death was 5:15. First forensic officer arrived at 8 a.m. So that means that 15 hours went by. There was no tests on her, no test for rigor mortis or any other kind of time-reliant evidence. So when her body was removed from the scene and taken to the morgue, by that time it was around 10 a.m. And this was already now national news. I mean, this had happened, like I say, in a small Scottish town. This was crazy. This was already going, in the news, and the proper tests hadn't been done. And that was insane to me. And I think one of the things that really bothers me is the fact that the crime scene, they didn't put a tent over her body. And there was precipitation that night. I think it was around 1 o'clock. So there's water falling from the sky. That's going to get Jodie's body. And they did also, to access her body and to get, some of the equipment in that they needed, they did chop down some of the branches. So they weren't tested. And, for an attack that was that ferocious, that crime scene did not fall into an adequate standard at all. In fact, it was described later on as inadequate, how that had been handled.
Right. Well, what I was wondering is, by that time, Luke's been taken to the police station, he's been interviewed, they've already decided, they probably got, when he gave 22-page statements, so they're bound to have had his timeline. I mean, this is just speculation, but they needed it to be about that time. So I wonder if they had communicated that to the forensic officer that came, and that's why they were quick enough to say 5:15, because she already knew that the police needed it to be about that time. I mean, it's just speculation, but that was where my mind went.
Yeah, do you know what? The amount of different thoughts I've had too, especially while researching this and putting everything together, because it took about 6 months to do. The amount of different scenarios and the what ifs, that crossed my mind was, I probably went through every scenario in my head, and then I tried to rationalize it, and then a new piece of evidence would come, or I'd read something else in another statement, and it would make me think differently about something I'd thought differently about before. My mind was just like a load of dots, basically, all floating, and I was it's almost like trying to put, maggots back in a bag. It was so hard. It was so hard.
It was. Yeah, everything you said, you were just questioning everything. How long was that Luke actually at the police station for? Do you know when he got to leave again?
He was at home the next day, from what I remember, and then the search came on the 4th. So in that time, they did also start to interview Luke's family as well. So they did interview his brother Shane as well.
Okay. It was interesting that you said that at the trial, one of the police officers said that Luke was the only real suspect that they were considering. But then at the same time, been setting up roadblocks and they were interviewing people. And I just think, which is it? Are you looking for somebody else, or did they do their due diligence and they ended up coming back to Luke? Or I just was confused by that statement. This is the only one we're looking at, but we're still, I don't know.
Absolutely. I think as we get further in, you see the amount of other, I won't say suspects because you're not allowed to, but persons of interest that could have had possibly more of a reason to have done this.
Definitely. Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about the talking clock. They made such a big deal about that. But he phoned the talking clock all the time. And I remember when I was a teenager, I used the talking clock. I remember I was waiting for the bus one time and I was checking the time. And I phoned it about 4 or 5 times, in quick succession. There was a TV in the living room. The video had the time on it. So that was something I did all the time. So I totally got where he was coming from. I would phone it as well.
Okay. I don't know if that's a Scottish thing. My dad used to tell me that it cost too much money and don't call the talking clock. But that's all I can remember.
When you're a teenager, you don't care about that, though.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
That's true. Again.
Exactly. I think also that there was the fact that he had called that other times. Yeah. It's worth noting that, back then in 2003, not all mobile phones had the time on the front of the screen. So there was probably a way to add it to the display. I would have been quite young then, but from what I gather at the time, I mean, I don't know if he was just being a lazy boy and couldn't be bothered to look at there was a time, I think it was
on the clock. There was a clock, but it was slow, or was it?
It was broken, yeah, and it would never work. It was more decorative. Well, that's what they said to the police. So he just called the talking clock. Yeah. And the one thing that I think with that is that there was, that for me, I just didn't really understand why he called the talking clock. I didn't understand why. He said it was to see when his, mother was going to be home. She would arrive home at 5:15, which ironically was, the presumed time of death for Jodie. And he was making the dinner, but he wanted to get the exact time, because he wanted to time the dinner and make sure it was ready for when his mum got home. So I don't know. People are different, aren't they? People are weird. Again, I just didn't feel like that added a lot to convince me either way, to be honest with you. I didn't think it didn't really make me think, oh God, that's so strange that he must have killed her. No. But it also didn't make me think, oh, that's completely normal.
Oh, I did. I thought it was completely normal.
Yeah, I absolutely think that is. If you say that's normal, then I
totally what I would have did. I remember it. I love that talking clock. I used it all the time.
I can hear the man's voice doing it.
Yes, it was a proper English voice, wasn't it? Very
times. That's by accuracy. Yeah.
Yes. No, I did that all the time. So hang on though. So if time of death was 5:15, which I'm not convinced by, and Luke's mum came in at 5:15, so they just weren't happy. Her statement wasn't enough to back up what he was saying. Is that right? I know Shane made a mess of his statement later on, but his mum, did she change her statement? Was there anything wrong with that?
No. They just felt like it's a mum. What do mums do? They pretty much do anything for their kids, or most of them do. So she wasn't really seen as someone that was credible. And it's worth noting that actually Corinne and Shane, his brother, they were both arrested for perverting the course of justice, but those charges were later dropped.
So if they were charged with it, then they were thought, oh, you're lying, but then the charges were dropped, so clearly they're not lying, so their evidence should have been taken into, should have been taken as gospel then. That didn't make sense. Make up your mind.
Yeah.
Okay, the bit that was awful, Naomi, was when Luke was being questioned about the sex he had with Jodie. Oh, that was really, really disturbing. I didn't like that.
No.
It made me cringe. That was just got awful. What was that about?
Yes.
But the thing was, I remember you saying that the police had said that they didn't believe Jodie's murder was sexual. So why are they asking about this sex if they're saying it's not? That doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. From before I knew anything else, as soon as I found out how poor Jodie had been left and what had happened to her, I instantly thought, okay, this is a sexually motivated crime. It's a sexual sadist. And I also interview a doctor who is, runs a counselling service and has done studying in psychology. And she said, I just told her, how she had been found. And I said, what do you think? She does feature on the podcast. And I said, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a crime of passion or what? And she went, oh, this is sexually motivated crime. Absolutely. And it was never treated that way. So yes, it was very odd that they went into such detail with a minor about their sex life and some of the questions that they asked. And I'll always remember these because, like you, it was a real part of the case that really did disturb me. But it was, okay, so when did your sexual relationship start? Okay, I can understand that a bit. And then it got more intense. What kind of sex do you like? What do you like about females' bodies? What in particular do you find erotic? And the way they were kind of twisting his words. So, for example, I've actually got it here and I can read a little bit, but it said that the actual transcript says, when did your sexual relationship start? Luke said, we've had sex about 5 or 6 times and it started when we started going out, which was a few months before. The questions get more intense. They said, where did the sex usually happen? Luke said, in my room. Then the police says, every time you had sexual intercourse, it was in your room. But there was a real clear shift in the language there because he had said the first question on the transcript was, where did the sex usually happen? But in the next time, they said every time. So it wasn't consistent. So I felt confused just even, reading through these. And I can imagine that would have completely bamboozled him as well. And also, he had just turned 15 by I think the point this interview had happened. Do you often talk about sex in that way? It's still quite a new thing. And then they start to ask Luke about his sexual fantasies, which again, for a child, it doesn't sit well with me at all. So the answer, he says that he just likes nice looking females and that sex was just sex. He hadn't kind of overthought it. And then the police officer comes back and says, well, most men usually have a particular child of a part of a female's body that he likes or finds particularly erotic. What do you like? Do you find a particular part? And he says no. And then the officer it sort of feels like he's trying to make him feel stupid because he says, what? So you're telling me you just, what do you find erotic about a female? And he's kind of pushing and pushing and pushing. And again, in his language, he says, most men usually find a particular part of the female's body erotic or whatever. But he's not a man. Yeah. He is a child. Yeah. And by this point, he did have a appropriate adult. His name was Alistair. He sat there and at no point in the transcripts does he intervene at any point whatsoever. So he sat there and let this questioning happen. And for me, I think that was quite a big failing on his part as well.
Do we know if he ever had any training? Did he know how to do his job?
He was employed as an appropriate adult, but I would definitely have put him back in for some training after that.
Definitely. That was awful. that's not an appropriate adult, that at all.
No.
I didn't like that. That made me uncomfortable. Yeah, and it went on, didn't it? Did you have sex outside? Somebody told us that they saw you. Well, was that true? Was that because they lied a couple of times, didn't they, the police, about, what was... Was that rubbish? Nobody'd seen sex outside.
I never quite got to the bottom of that, because I had access to a lot of stuff, but not to everything. And the police have been very, very cagey about giving anything out to the media. Like I said, they've never spoken about it. So I just had what I had on paper, and I've just had to run with that. But who knows? Who knows?
Oh, the other thing he said you probably not know this, but I'll say anyway. When he was being interviewed under Section 14, the police officer said that there'd been an accusation against Luke already of threatening a girl with a knife. Was that true? Did that ever come out? Did he do that?
He's never been arrested for it. It's never gone to trial. So I have no idea. I've never seen anything in the media from anyone who has sort of spoken out and said, Luke Mitchell did this to me. And I think that would have been really compelling if someone had done that.
Oh yeah, it would
no one ever has.
If I had a statement saying that would have been...
Yeah.
I think, there's something wrong there, but...
Yeah.
But then they also said that they told him that his semen had been found on Jodie's bra, which was lies as well. So it sounds like they were just throwing everything at him, trying to trick them.
Yeah, the semen on the bra. I mean, yeah. I mean, that's quite a deep dive.
Yeah.
I'll refer you to the podcast for that one, because that was, that bamboozled me as well. But I know we're building to something more, so I'll maybe save that for... I know. I think I figured out your line of questioning that will come later, but yeah.
Just going back to it wasn't seen as a sexual murder. Obviously, we said about that semen, but didn't you say there was semen found in her body as well?
Yes.
I'm myself now.
There's there's a lot.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
There's a lot of different things. Most notably, yes, so there was DNA found on Jodie's body, but it wasn't Luke's. There was also a condom 50 feet from the body, and it had fresh semen in it. They didn't know who that belonged to at the time of the arrest or Luke's conviction and when it went to trial. But 3 years afterwards, that DNA was matched to someone who said, and he was questioned, said that he had gone to the woods, and I'm sorry, listeners, I hope you're not eating, for private time. In a condom, that didn't make complete sense to me, but I'm not a man, I don't know. So that he had gone and done that before she had died. But then there was speculation about that timeline as well, because potentially we can't completely narrow down the exact time that he went there to do this. So potentially her body was nearby. And did he see it? Did he not? I have no idea. What I will say is that man is now a convicted sex offender. So.
Wow, okay, I didn't know that. You didn't say that in the podcast, did you? Did I miss that?
No. No, I don't know if I did. Maybe it was still under trial. I can't remember. He is now. Yeah.
My God. Going back to what we talked about earlier about how some murderers like to go back to the scene. Well, didn't he go back to the scene the next night and do the same again?
Yes, he did.
So
he went back to the scene and did that again. So I found that particularly disturbing, actually, that someone would go back and do that.
Yeah. First time, okay, you're saying you didn't see the body, but I think this is why I question the timeline, and there's something else that happens why I question the timeline. But if it didn't see the body, her body wasn't there, so fair enough. But then you came back the next night knowing that a young girl had been murdered. That was that's too much.
Absolutely. And I would have been thinking, this is a crime scene. This was small town, and I keep saying that, but everybody knew what had happened. There was a real danger that crime scene investigators might have come up. How did he know there was no tape still left around there, that there weren't people still working on the scene, which, to be honest, there should have been, I think, 24 hours later. But that always stood out to me as particularly odd.
Oh, yes, bad enough doing that in the first place. Does he not have a bathroom?
Odd, isn't it? Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. Yeah, very, very, very strange behaviour.
But yes, the DNA that was found on Jodie's top was her sister's boyfriend's DNA.
Yeah, Stephen Kelly. So the man who also found her body. Alongside Luke. Yeah.
So could it have been transferred at that time, do you think?
So he said he didn't touch the body.
And I know he's saying that it's because the t-shirt, the top was
her sister's top.
So, and obviously they were in contact. But you also said that it was washed, it was clean. So would that have survived the wash?
Well, so this was from the forensic investigator who, takes stuff from the crime scene and has a look. And they said that, they have to do a lot of things. They have to look at the evidence, they test, they swab, and they smell is part of their examination. And it smelled of laundry. When you wash clothes, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert in this at all. I find that quite hard to believe. And I did look it up. I did try to do research on that. A majority of journals that I looked at said that it was unlikely, but it wasn't impossible. So again, a pinch of salt with that one, but I found that very odd.
Do we know how much of a sample size it was? Was it?
I don't know. No.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
When Luke did an interview with that man that tricked him when Jodie's funeral was going on, the journalist.
Yes. Oh, goodness me.
That was sad.
Yeah. The footage of that interview is really weird. And I don't know if you know how it came about, but basically this Sky journalist called Jim Matthews knocked on, I think he phoned actually. Did he phone and said, yeah, are you going to Jodie's funeral? He had been asked not to go by the family. The reason they'd given him was that, it was a media circus surrounding him. They didn't want that at the funeral. Do I get it? Absolutely. That totally seems like a reasonable thing to say. Obviously, if Luke is innocent, then that really sucks for him not to be able to go to his girlfriend's funeral. But he decided to do his own memorial at home. So they light a candle and they think that it's time to kind of take back a bit of the narrative. And Corinne, Luke's mum, thinks this is an opportunity to actually show the world that her son is a nice boy and he's not this devil worshipping kind of gothic figure that they've made him out to be, and this Satan worshipper. So, he comes round and, he looks like a child in this. In physical form, yes, he's quite a tall lad and whatever. But actually, his face, he looks like a baby. He's got a real baby face. And his mum is sitting there and she's got his arm around him. And the questioning very quickly starts off as being, very soft and gentle. And then it really does sort of take a bit of a turn and it becomes quite accusatory. And actually, it really is, it's not good for the case. This guy really did overstep a line, People think, it's you, what do you think? I've got the transcripts from that. And I do read them out on the podcast. And actually, you see that it's quite dirty journalism, actually. And then he goes into things like, he says, so I suppose the difficulty is from 5 p.m. to whenever Jodie was found, that's a long time to fill and to account for, especially if you use track of time. Can you account for every minute? I mean, this is like a police interrogation. This isn't a journalist, that's not a journalist's job at that point before he's been charged with anything and he's a child. So shame on him.
Yeah, totally. That was too far. But I felt really sorry for Corinne. Yeah. I felt really sorry for her because I think she was trying to help her son and it backfired, but she couldn't have known that. She just trusted the wrong person, I think, didn't she?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And what do you do, if you've never been in that situation before? I don't know, would I have done the same thing? Maybe, maybe if everyone thought my son was this monster and I truly believed he wasn't, and I wanted them to see actually how polite he was or how articulate he was or whatever, I think I probably would have done the same, but it completely backfired didn't it?
But what he said was quite interesting. It made me think. He said he doesn't care about the police accusations.
Yeah.
He just wants to find out what happened to Jodie and that is still the worst thing that's happened in his life. It's
quite sophisticated acting, if that's acting, if he is, then, he's got surely got a career in film when he comes out, because that was very convincing. But who knows?
He also said during that interview that he knew that he was the police's suspect and that, researched his house all the time and he knew that, all eyes were on him. Do you think it antagonised the police a wee bit, like have him in the papers, sort of slating them a wee bit? Do you think that maybe...
Absolutely. Reputation for the police doing that job. That's going to sting, and egos are going to get bruised, aren't they?
Yeah, I thought that. Luke wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, which fair enough. I understand they didn't want it into a media circus. But then he went afterwards and put flowers on her grave, which, again, if he didn't do it, if he did do it, it's sick. But if he didn't do it, he was just putting the flowers on the grave. He didn't know that the reporters were going to be following him and photographing him. And
I thought that was, again, that was something that if you're a journalist, that's the money shot. You want those pictures of the potential killer at the grave. That's going to sell newspapers. That's going to cause controversy. Ethically and morally, shame on them again. You know, that not necessarily even for Luke there, but actually for Jodie, you know, and for her family. They just buried their daughter, you know, and that was really hard for me to comprehend, actually. Yeah.
And I could understand why Jodie's mum, when she found out, took the flowers and put them back on his doorstep. I understand that. But at the same time, again, it's sending a clear message, isn't it? Like, we don't want you, we don't want anything to do with you, we think you're guilty.
Absolutely.
So that was hard. Again, if it is, you know, I get why she did it, but if he was innocent, oh, that's so harsh.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I always try to think of both scenarios. You know, if you did do it, then my God, that's a pretty sick thing you've just done.
Yeah. Of the burning of the clothes, it said, first of all, that a female member of Luke's family had said she was asked to burn clothes. Was that right?
No. So what happened with the clothes is that a neighbour saw a fire. So they had like a bonfire type thing in their back garden. And a neighbour said that they had smelt some smoke after Jodie would have been murdered. So in that interim between her being murdered and her being found. And this all really boiled down to this alleged Parker jacket that he had. But nobody could ever find any photos of him in this Parker jacket that the eyewitness had said he'd been wearing and that had allegedly been burned. This was quite weird because actually the crime scene itself, most of the blood from Jodie was actually beneath her in the soil. So I am not a blood analyst. I'm not a crime scene expert, but my thought was always that actually, surely there would have been quite a lot of blood. If you think, you know, the poor girl had her breast cut off, she had her throat slashed. The prosecution were talking about the way in which he would have caused these injuries, and if she'd been facing away and he'd come from behind, then, you know, maybe he wouldn't have had any blood on him. I mean, I still find that quite bizarre. But the prosecution said that, you know, because a neighbour had smelt this fire and this burning, that it must have been them burning the Parker jacket. But I mean, he did have a Parker jacket again that was brought afterwards because the police had taken all of his clothes in the search when they had the warrant. So she had to replace some, and she did buy him a Parker jacket. But there was never any photos of him in this style of Parker jacket before. And the reason they fixated on a Parker jacket was because the eyewitness had described him as wearing that, when actually, you know, he says he wasn't, and other people's testimony says different.
You know how he was seen sitting on the wall by 3 boys that knew him? I thought it was them that said he always wore a green Parker jacket. I must have picked
Yes, they did. They did.
They?
Yeah, they did say that as well, yeah.
And I was thinking, well, they could have been mistaken because obviously got the Parker jacket after Jodie died, and they could have just mixed up the timeline. But if they didn't, then why would they lie about that? Because they were his friends, they knew him, they were on his side. So I thought, why would they lie about him having a Parker jacket?
I mean, do you know what? I think they weren't necessarily like close friends. They just knew of him. Okay. So again, I mean, it's like Chinese whispers, isn't it? And then I go back to thinking, I think, okay, so I see my extended family all the time. But if they said to me, can you go and get my coat from, you know, say we were somewhere, can you go and get my coat from the coat peg? I'd probably have to ask them which one it was. I probably wouldn't have taken enough notice to know exactly the type of coat that they had. So that always just stuck in my mind. But maybe they were really observant.
So maybe once the police had spoken to this witness who said the Parker jacket, perhaps they then had spoken to the boys, and maybe the little seed had been planted. You never know.
Again, it's one of those many questions that will come up in this.
We need to in that interview.
Oh, I know. It's a really big thing, isn't it? So there was no forensic evidence found in the log burner in the garden either. Yeah. So you would expect there to be some fibres or something. unless they're professional arsonists. That's what I would have thought anyway. Maybe they did a thorough job. Maybe they did get all of the stuff out of the log burner, but there was stuff in the log burner. It wasn't completely empty and clean.
But, to be fair, they've already got Luke pinned as being this professional murderer who manages to murder Jodie, get back to his house, never be seen, change all his clothes or get rid of his clothes, remain dirty but get rid of all the DNA and then get back and sit on the wall to be seen. So, they've already got him pegged as a mastermind. So, yes, they could easily.
Absolutely. It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Also, how could anybody, going back to the footage that was shown when the interviewer, Jim Matthews, was speaking to them, how could anybody read into the fact that Corinne was sitting with her arm around her boy? What the hell?
I know some people made some really sick accusations. They were even accusing them of incest because she's stroking the back of his neck. I have a boy and oh my God, he's only a toddler. So, I'm always on him, but I can always imagine that I will always probably treat him like my little boy. And, probably even at 38, I'll be comforting him. So I think that was just malice, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they're just feeding into it now, I think, aren't they, at that stage?
Yeah, absolutely.
So from that footage, detectives sent to someone that worked with the FBI and the CIA, who was a human lie detector.
Yes, so he's a facial something analyst. So basically he looks for micro signs in somebody's face to see if they're lying or not. So yeah, they call him the human lie detector. He thinks he can look at someone's face and analyze the small micro movements that they make and tell if somebody's lying. And he said that he thought he agreed with the police that they had the right person.
The lie detector machine is not 100% accurate. People can beat that. So how can a human who has flaws make such a statement? I don't think that's right.
Well, if we're going on to the subject of lie detectors, Luke has done a lie detector and he passed.
I know, and Corinne as well.
That's right.
But what did you say? What was the percentage? Did I write that down?
Oh yeah, do you know what? I should know this because I used to work on chat shows and we used to use them all the time.
Yeah, you see, that's where I get them because the Jeremy Kyle show, right?
Yeah.
And see, this is why I don't trust lie detectors, because people tell you how you can fool them and such like, don't they? And
yes, it's 87%.
87. It's quite high actually, but I don't.
But there's still that 13%. So to keep it balanced, absolutely, there is 13% chance, and that's not nothing. So I always kept that in my mind. But I think it was the willingness to do the lie detector, to bring that in, because if he had failed, then I think a lot of his supporters would have probably vanished.
That's another thing to think about, isn't it? Well, it's certainly the ones that are against him. I think he did it. That would have been gold for them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, absolutely. I guess it was a bit of a risk, but it's not something to be used just on its own, I don't think, is it? You need to.
That's right. I would say so. He also wrote her a poem as well, which he read out on the news.
And that again, like you keep saying, it's a brutal murder. And he wrote this beautiful poem for her. And so he's, as a 14-year-old boy, he's so, fucked up in the head that he's able to compartmentalize these different emotions, aggression and rage and anger. And then this lovely, that was too much as well.
Yeah.
Get that.
It was very conflicting. But potentially, again, either someone that is completely innocent, or is it someone who's a complete psychopath? But at 14, it's the age that always gets me. It really does bring me back down to that. You've got very little life experience at 14. And that was just always the thing that stuck in the back of my mind.
When I was listening to your episodes, I would listen on my phone and I would always look at his photo the whole time on the little thumbnail the whole time. And I would go from, God, you're only 14 years old, so God, are you really that clever? No, I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean, God,
no,
you could be this clever. Are you really this clever? You've got away with this. And I kept swinging it and I think, God, poor lad. And then, but are you clever?
Yeah. It's that's really, really hard to comprehend.
I keep saying he didn't get away with it. He's not that clever if he did, but I'm thinking, God, are you fooling us all? And then the other thing is he's missing out on his education. His life just was over at that point, wasn't it? Missing out on his education.
Right. That's right.
Couldn't go to
they
school.
They tried to get him in a different classroom, kind of away from other people, and that didn't work. And I see why that didn't work. And then tried to homeschool, and then that didn't really work. And then, again, that's another element of normality that goes and is pulled from under your feet.